Hello, welcome to the Analyst Inside Cricket with me, Simon Hughes.
And I'm Simon Mann.
And our special guest today is Peter de la Pena, who is an expert on many aspects of cricket, but particularly associate nations and the USA. He's a journalist and commentator who is regularly heard on BBC, actually, of course, and seen around the place writing pieces. A real expert on the USA cricket. Peter, you must have been pleased with the way the USA played in this tournament, although in the end, of course, they didn't qualify for the Super 8s quite. But they've shown some signs of emergence.
Well, the most impressive part about their performance was the fact that they had such little preparation going into this tournament. Their last T20I of any kind was in April of 2025, and that was in a North America Cup where the standard of competition was far below what they saw in the World Cup. They were playing against teams like the Cayman Islands and Bahamas and Bermuda, in addition to Canada. But you have to go all the way back to the 2024 T20 World Cup. Their final match against England and Barbados was the last time that they played a T20I against a full member in June 2024. So the fact that they had such little preparation as a team, and I know some people will argue, well, some of the players were playing in franchise competitions, whether it's Major League Cricket or you had guys like Saurabh Netravalkar after Major League Cricket was part of the champion squad for Trinbago Knight Riders in the Caribbean Premier League, and Andres House was part of the Desert Vipers ILT20 champion squad, and he scored a century in the semifinal of that tournament. So individually, they had some preparation, but collectively as a team, they were far short of match practice coming into this tournament. And to challenge India the way that they did on opening night, and if Shubham Ranjane holds on to that caught and bowled return chance against Surya Kumar Yadav when he's only on 15-16 and then goes on to make 84 not out, I mean, there's so many what ifs in this tournament, and that's one of them for the associate perspective. If he holds on to that chance, USA could cause one of the great shocks in World Cup history.
That's right. And we'll talk more about the T20 World Cup in due course, actually. And you've got some interesting ideas about helping associate nations in the future. And also we'll talk about USA cricket and how it's going. I just want to bring up one thing before we get into our main story of the day, which is about the fact that in the 100 draft or auction, which is about to be staged next month, that it's emerged that there is a likelihood or a very strong possibility that the Indian-owned or the Indian Premier League-owned franchises or franchises that are partly owned by Indian Premier League teams are not going to pick Pakistan-born players or players playing for Pakistan. We'll debate that in a minute, but just before we do, I just want to bring up the fact that today is February the 20th, and it's exactly 10 years since Brendan McCullum broke the world record for the fastest Test 100. Today, in 2016 in Christchurch, he hit a 54-ball 100 against Australia. And it was quite a sort of transformative innings, Simon, wasn't it?
Well, it's stunning. Yeah, a remarkable innings. A few of the England players seem to have wanted to break that record since. No one succeeded. And as it's happened, no one has broken the England record, which I mean, bizarrely in a way, when you think of the way that the modern game is played, as we know, goes back to the start of the 20th century and Gilbert Jessup at the Oval. And we don't quite know how many balls in which he took to make his 100, whether it's 74, 75, 76, but we know it was pretty rapid and no one's beaten it since.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, 54 balls was the number of balls that the McCullum needed to get his 100 against Australia. I mean, I just remember, way back 1986. So that's 40 years ago. Viv Richards making his 56-ball 100 against England, and how sensational that was at the Antigua Recreation Ground, and just completely taking the English bowlers against England, taking the English bowling apart. And would anyone ever beat that? And then obviously McCullum did 54 balls. No one's quite challenged that since, but around the world, but. There have been one or two threats on that record. Anyway, it's a nice badge of honour that Brendan McCullum wears, in addition to his sensational innings in the first ever IPL game, which I was also at, 2008, 158 not out for the Knight Riders against Bangalore Challengers, I think it was, at Bangalore, the opening night of the IPL. And the IPL has had this amazing impact on the game, but it also is having an oppressive impact potentially, isn't it? Because although it's now or the owners of the IPL franchises have now invested a lot of money in English cricket. The story emerging from primarily, Simon, from agents, I think, of players, is that their clients, i.e. Pakistani players, are not being taken up by the Indian Premier League owned franchises of the 100 in the draft that is coming up next month.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to say about this. I mean, what are the bottom lines? One, it doesn't surprise me. I think you're right. This story has come from agents, so it has a lot of veracity about it. And the other thing as well is it's a mess for the ECB because they've got diversity and inclusivity charter, and it seems clearly prejudicial. But because they've sold the competition on to and taken a lot of money for it, what can they do about it? I mean, it's an absolute mess. It really is. And I don't think it'll sit very well with people who are anti the 100. I mean, it's a real grist to the mill for them. And I wonder how the story's going to progress because it doesn't. I don't think it sits right with anybody. Well, it doesn't sit right with anybody in the English cricket community. And there've been a lot of voices already, piped up and commented on it. And look, it's really not sustainable. I don't think you can have it. It totally compromises the game, surely.
Just to dot the I's and cross the T's. So there are 4 of the 100 franchises owned by or partly owned by IPL franchises. Southern Brave, which are owned by the Delhi Capitals, or the people who own the Delhi Capitals. MI Oval, the renamed Oval Invincibles, who are owned by the Reliance Group, which is Mukesh Ambani and his family. The Manchester Supergiants, that are owned by the people who own the Lucknow Supergiants in India. And Sunrisers Leeds, the renamed Northern Superchargers, now Sunrisers Leeds, owned by the Hyderabad company, the Sun Group, who also own, of course, the Sunrisers Hyderabad. So those 4 teams, it is alleged, will not be selecting Pakistan players from the draft or the auction, which is happening in mid-March. There, I think, are 711 players, I read, that have been registered for that auction, and 63 of them are Pakistani. So it suggests that only 4 of the franchises, the 100 franchises, will be able to pick Pakistani players. So, Peter, just to give a bit of context on that, in America, we've got the MLC, of course, the Major League Cricket, which is, the T20 tournament in America. And some of those franchises are owned by IPL owners. Do they allow Pakistani players?
Well, this is where there's some interesting gray area, if you want to characterize it in that way, because if you look at the MI New York squad, for example, they have Ehsan Adil, who's in their team. And Ehsan Adil played for Pakistan. He's one of those rare players who, after this T20 World Cup, has now represented 2 different countries in T20Is. And so he played for Pakistan, and then he made his debut, ironically, against Pakistan for USA in this T20 World Cup, having played for several seasons in Major League Cricket and having qualified on residency under the ICC guidelines to represent USA. So he's of Pakistani heritage, actually played for Pakistan, and MI New York had no issues signing him and having him represent their team. And then you look at some of the other squads, again, with IPL affiliations. If you take a look at Texas Super Kings, Mohammad Mohsin, identical situation. Mohammad Mohsin played all of his cricket, developmental cricket, first-class cricket in Pakistan, migrated to the USA 3 or 4 years ago, made his debut for USA in the T20 World Cup, but Pakistani heritage, and represents the Super Kings franchise. And Ali Khan is probably the most high-profile USA player who moved to the USA at age 18, 19, originally in Ohio, but he's represented Knight Riders franchises around the world. Again, Pakistani heritage, U.S. citizen, but dual passport holder, and he played for Trinbago Knight Riders, has played for them for many seasons. He was included as a replacement player for Calcutta Knight Riders during the 2020 IPL that was played in the UAE, where COVID interrupted the season. And ironically, that allowed him to play for KKR for the first time, because historically there has always been interest in him playing in the IPL, but one of the stumbling blocks for him, there was in the lead up to the T20 World Cup, was getting a visa. There's always been visa complications for him getting into India. So the only time he was actually able to be part of an IPL franchise was when it was not in India. It was in the UAE due to COVID.
Yeah.
So he's played for LA Knight Riders. So it kind of exposes a little bit of a hypocrisy there, where there's one rule for some and not for others that's being applied, where if you can be of Pakistani heritage or Pakistan citizen or even have represented Pakistan in the past, but depending on how that wants to be interpreted by certain franchises, that depends and dictates how the rule is apparently going to be applied.
I mean, the Knight Riders are an interesting case, aren't they? Because, of course, they are owned by Shah Rukh Khan, the famous Bollywood actor, who is Muslim. And there's been conflict around that franchise before. Obviously, they were the ones who selected Mustafiza, who's Bangladeshi, to play in the Kolkata Knight Riders this year. And that was blocked. That selection was blocked by the BCCI. And so that caused Bangladesh ultimately to be to refuse to play in the T20 World Cup. So it had ramifications, of course. But the Knight Riders seem to be a law unto themselves, and probably partly because of their Muslim owner. Presumably, they are happy, or they're happy to have Pakistani-born or Pakistani-origined cricketers to play for their other franchises around the world, though not necessarily Calcutta Knight Riders. Simon, Peter mentioned there the word hypocrisy. I mean, as far as the English Cricket Board, the ECB, is concerned, it's a very difficult situation, isn't it? Because, I mean, in a way, they've almost ceded, because of selling out the franchises to these Indian Premier League owners, they've sort of almost ceded control.
Yeah, and that will be the criticism, that you've not got control over one of your main products, or not enough control. Look, one way in which you could kind of wriggle out of it is to say there's no official policy. There's no official policy that they're not going to select Pakistan players in the draft. But if the agents are saying that Pakistan players are, as the kind of unwritten rule, one of the agents said that we wouldn't put forward Pakistan players for these various teams. If you've got that, then I mean, it's a really hard one to kind of really wriggle out of. So it's embarrassing. It really is. I don't know what the solution is, but it kind of compromises the competition, really, and it's so difficult for the ECB to respond to this in a way that's kind of convincing. I think convincing for the cricket public in the UK.
Money equals power in this situation, doesn't it? And
money always equals power.
It always equals power. Yeah, sure.
Not just in this, every situation since.
Yes, I suppose. But of course, it's ironic that on this particular day, the ECB have issued a press release saying that more and more investment from the board in the charities, the various institutions that are helping inclusivity and diversity in the game, the likes of Chance to Shine, Lord's Taverners, MCC Foundation, SACA, the South Asian Cricket Association, ACE, the thing that Ebony Rainford Bent helps run at the Oval, looking at Afro-Caribbean and all that. So, that's an attempt by the ECB to increase and improve their diversity and inclusivity. Meanwhile, this is going on in the background, which is kind of almost contrary to their principles.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a sort of smelly dead fish in your drawer, isn't it, really? The stench is there, and it's difficult to get rid of it. So I don't know what the solution is. There is a solution. Would be that 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the Indian-owned franchises does select a Pakistan player, but it doesn't look as though they're being put forward. Look, one thing that's happening here is that there were only 2 in the 100 last year, and Pakistan actually got a tour to the West Indies as well, so that takes away some of their players. The pool of Pakistan players perhaps is not as great, but there'll still be players who potentially would be in the 100 on merit. Well, watch this space, really, isn't it? What is going to be the ECB sort of ultimate response to it? Because I mean, they kind of say, we're committed to inclusivity and diversity, but you can say one thing, but then you kind of look at the evidence, the suggested evidence via the agents, and it seems to be something very different. what you might have is that the non-Indian owned teams might pick up Pakistan players. And you say, well, look, there's 100. There are Pakistan players in the 100 competing against Indian owned teams. Let's see what happens. But I mean, there's going to be a lot of people who are going, hold on a second, this really doesn't sit right. Those people who question the 100 and the sell-off of the 100, of course, there's been a lot of money come into the game as a result of it. Question that the actual 100 first up would be, there'll been uproar, I'm sure. As I said earlier, it's grist to the mill totally of the critics of the 100 and how it's kind of plonked its great big bottom in the middle of the juicy part of the summer.
Let's sort of just try and shift the conversation a little bit towards the USA, because I've mentioned on this podcast a couple of times before that our dependence as the world game on India and Pakistan and the contests between them, which raises a lot of obviously extra TV revenue and interest generally, and which has become a constant sort of talking point. Will they play? Will they not? And all that, and where are they going to play, etc. It causes lots of ruptures in the game, but it does generate lots of income. And I've said a couple of times before, Peter, that the emergence of the USA as the world's biggest sports market, the emergence of USA cricket, and the fact that they've now got their own T20 tournament and are starting to punch, not above their weight, but sort of at a reasonable level on the international stage. Is that good for the game? And do you see that progressing?
I think back to, it's got to be a decade ago now, Tim Anderson, when he was the head of global development at the ICC in that role, one of the things he was trying to emphasize and stress to his bosses at the ICC at the time was to lessen the overdependence on India, that long term that was not going to augur well if a situation like happened in this T20 World Cup where there was near catastrophe from a financial standpoint, where everybody was panicking over the potential cancellation of the India-Pakistan match and the financial implications that would cause and the trickle-down effect of lost revenue and who feels that the most. And there was so many discussions about, well, BCCI is going to ask the money that was lost to be taken out of Pakistan's, the PCB's chunk of the revenue distribution. And historically speaking, when any of these kind of events have happened, it's not the interested parties who are directly impacted. The people who feel the pinch more than anybody are the associates, because the associates kind of get the crumbs that are left after everybody else gets paid out and gets their slice of the pie first. And so when this was happening, there was so much talk and intense fervor about, who's going to get payback? Is the BCCI going to get one over the PCB, or the PCB the ones who have the upper hand and they're holding the BCCI to ransom? And there was so much focus on that. Whereas I know from talking to people in the associate sphere and Andrew Leonard and others, Andrew Leonard has been on the Nepal broadcast for the T20 World Cup, and he's made a big name for himself over the course of this tournament. And I keep in contact with him on a regular basis, and him and others, we were all coming from the perspective of, it's not going to be Pakistan who feels the pinch. It's going to be Nepal and USA and Canada and Namibia and those countries. They're the ones who are most at risk of getting their funding cut. So having USA emerge going forward, whether it's through on-field performance as a group in the national team or developing their own franchise competition, which is gaining more and more interest, and more overseas players are signing up and registering their interest and trying to be part of Major League Cricket. And they've talked about expanding from 6 teams to 8 teams over the next few years. If that starts to increase value and it helps to lessen that dependence on India and the BCCI, then I don't think there will be as much of a panic in the future if another situation arises like this, because people look at it and say, yeah, you know what, we're not going to be living on, pennies, and we're not going to be looking for change underneath the couch and the sofa and trying to scrape to get by. We'll be okay.
Is there a real possibility of that, though? Is there a real possibility that USA cricket could start to, really kind of expand and draw in more people, therefore become sort of financially more viable, and eventually contribute to the world cricket economy in a more significant way.
As USA Cricket, maybe not, because the governing body is still suspended. I mean, that was one of the other kind of subplots of USA's performance in this World Cup, is they've done this in spite of the fact that their governing body is suspended by the ICC, which happened in September, October. And there's still administrative chaos that has been the case ever since I've been covering U.S. cricket, going back to 2009. It was there long before I started covering it. I mean, there are suspensions when they were known as the USA Cricket Association, happened in 2005, 2007, and 2015. And then they were expelled. And now, 2019, they were readmitted as USA Cricket. But in reality, they may have shaved off that last A from USACA and made it USAC. But the names and faces have hardly changed from an administrative standpoint on the ground. It's still the more or less the same cast of characters who have been at each other's throats, can't get along, and the ICC had to step in again just before the World Cup. And the ICC told USA Cricket, please stay away. We don't want you ruining this event. And in the interim, from 2022 to 24 to 2025, they couldn't get their act together. One of the tipping points again to suspension was they threatened to dissolve the franchise agreement with Major League Cricket and American Cricket Enterprises. They had signed a 50-year agreement for the tender rights for the franchise league. And after 3 years, USA Cricket wanted to tear it up because they realized at 3 years in, oh man, we undersold ourselves. This thing is looking like it's going to be a hell of a lot more valuable than we initially thought, and we want a bigger cut. They signed 95% of revenue over to MLC and ACE, and they said, oh, geez, we're only keeping 5%. Man, that wasn't such a great idea. We need to renegotiate this thing. And MLC rightfully said, the deal is signed. If you feel like you've got a raw deal 3 years in because the value of the league is increasing, well, that tough luck. That's life. That's business. And because they tried to tear up that agreement, that is when the ICC stepped in and said, we're suspending because again, with IPL owners involved, these are, rich people don't like losing money more than anybody else. And the last thing an IPL owner wants is to see their investment go up in smoke and their money to be lit on fire.
And that's quite a key point, I think, actually, because, obviously the administration of USA Cricket is a bit of a mess, but the fact they've now got investment from IPL franchises, going back to our original point on this show, really, but has increased the interest and investment, obviously, in the game and the 6 teams in the MLC. But I wonder also, looking at the makeup of your current USA team, whether there's a transition going on, which is quite encouraging for the game, for the USA team and for the game in general, that instead of relying, as you probably did in the past, on expats from the Caribbean and maybe from South Africa a bit and Australia, now there seems to be a growing number of players that are homebred but have a South Asian diaspora origin. 2 or 3 of the names I noticed playing in the current side: Sanjay Krishnamurthy, for instance, and Mukamala, USA born but of Indian origin. Is there a transition going on there in sort of the kind of framework of USA Cricket?
The migration patterns historically have mirrored themselves on and off the field. So if you go back to like the 1950s and 60s and 70s, the bulk of USA squads and the USA administrators in those eras were Australian, British expats. I mean, if you go back even a little bit deeper to the 1930s, you think about the formation of the Hollywood Cricket Club, it was Australian and British actors, C. Aubrey Smith and David Nivens and people like that.
That famous man who played 1 test as captain for England and then was dropped after that. He only played 1 test. He was captain in about 1887 or something, and he captained. And I think they won the test, and he did all right. And then he was dropped, never played again. Bizarre, but he helped set up the Hollywood Cricket Club. Probably carry on.
Yeah, so it was people like that helped form cricket in California and lay the foundations. And then you go into the 60s and 70s and 80s, and more West Indian immigrants from Jamaica, from Guyana came in, and then suddenly the administration was being taken over by West Indians, and that was mirrored on the field. So from like the 1980s up until 2012, 2013, every single captain for USA was of West Indian heritage, predominantly Guyanese, but there were a few Jamaican captains in there as well. And then really it was the dot-com boom in the late 90s and early 2000s that suddenly you had this huge wave of Indian migration come in. And it took a generation for that to take hold at the administrative level. So when Gladstone Dainty was the president of USA Cricket, presiding over all those suspensions, 2005, 2007, 2015, again, the West Indians were still in charge. And if you look at the squads, it would still be about 50-50, but tilting slightly, 51-49 towards West Indian players being the bulk of the player selections. Their power bases were in New York and Washington, D.C. and Florida. And now, when USA Cricket Association was expelled and the readmission happened in 2019 under USA Cricket, Indians basically took over the entire board member positions across USA Cricket. And what has that meant? It's reflected on the field as well. So you look at not just the USA men's team, but you look at the USA women's team that was in the T20 World Cup qualifier in Nepal for the women. 13 out of the 15 players were of Indian American heritage. There was not a single West Indian female heritage player in that squad. You look at the under 19 men that were in Zimbabwe for that World Cup, where you had Nitish Sudhini, who scored a century for USA, and Adnat Jam, who scored a century for USA. Nitish Sudhini, born and raised in Georgia. Adnat Jam, born and raised in St. Louis, second-generation Americans. But that whole squad, all 15 players, Indian American. There was not a single West Indian American represented player, let alone any other culture. And again, now you're starting to see that at the men's level. You mentioned Sai Mukamala and Sanjay Krishnamurti. Sai Mukamala, born and raised in New Jersey, second-generation Indian American. Sanjay Krishnamurti, his mother is Julie Castens, is her maiden name, but she's from Arizona. She met her husband, Satya, at graduate school at Arizona State, and they got married. And so Sanjay's a kind of a unique case where he's mixed heritage family, but his dad's Indian heritage, and now he's second-generation American coming up. And yeah, that's how you're seeing the trend go. And in some ways, that's great for the Indian Americans who've been kind of held back. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people in the 2000s, 2010s era who felt like, man, the Indians are getting slighted. If the West Indians are controlling everything, they're holding us back. On the flip side of that, now you're starting to see conversations go the other way, where the West Indian community is feeling very marginalized in American cricket. I mean, if you go back to the 2024 T20 World Cup squad, when you're talking about second-generation players, Stephen Taylor was born and raised in Florida. He'd been playing for USA for 15 years. He was the first player for USA to get picked to play in the Caribbean Premier League. He'd been in other franchise competitions, and he's kind of at the tail end of his career. But he was kind of like the passing of the torch of the second-generation kids from him to Sanjay Krishnamurti and Sai Mukamala. And it's great for the likes of Sanjay Krishnamurti and Sai Mukamala, and hopefully that they're inspiring more kids in the Indian American community. And that's where all the money is. The investment is coming from Silicon Valley and in Seattle with Microsoft and Satya Nadella and all these types of people who are investing in Major League Cricket. It's great for them, but it's come at the expense in some ways of the West Indian diaspora, and there's a lot of unhappiness from that side. You don't want it to be a zero-sum game, but that's kind of how the ecosystem has evolved in America.
Well, that's very interesting, Peter. We'll take a quick break, and afterwards we'll look at the T20 World Cup and talk about the emerging nations and England's opponents coming up this weekend.
One of the interesting aspects of this T20 World Cup, and I think it's been a really good 2 weeks for the game. Decent sized crowds, lots of interesting matches, and of course the associate teams have performed pretty well. There's been only one upset, and that's not from an associate team. It's from Zimbabwe, or a full member. They play Test cricket. They beat Australia. That's still considered an upset. But there've been some really interesting games. But Peter, one of your ideas is, I mean, the teams seem to be just sort of not exactly sort of given a free pass into the T20 World Cup, but if you get into the Super 8s, you qualify for the next T20 World Cup. So there's a qualification process, of sorts. And also, if you're in a particular part of the rankings, you qualify as well. And then there's about 8 places left for actual qualifying matches and teams to come through the qualifiers. One of your ideas, I think, is that there should be like the Football World Cup, that actually the hosts qualify, but the rest have to actually qualify in a qualifying tournament. Is that right? Do you think that's what should happen? And just briefly, how would that work, and how would it benefit some of the lesser teams, if you like?
Well, absolutely. I've felt this, and I'm not the only one who's said this. I want to be clear. This is not like it's a completely original idea of mine, but there's been a source of kind of unease over the years where why do the associates have to qualify, but the full members don't in terms of on-field qualification? Yes, there is a qualification process that's decided by rankings or your advancement to the Super 8, but in reality, if you look at the FIFA model, every team has to qualify, and that goes for England and Italy and Argentina and France and whoever else. And we feel that that's justified because you want it to be merit-based. You want it to be meritocracy and not based on some historical status that's been assigned 100 years ago. And so from the regional qualification standpoint, all I'm arguing for is, I mean, there's been talk about maybe there should be a 5 nations tournament added into the calendar for European teams to help Italy and Scotland and Netherlands and Ireland
or even 6 nations, a bit like rugby.
Get consistent exposure against England, make England play these teams when historically they have not. And I mean, even Ireland, you could argue, has been shafted in terms of scheduling by England in the time that since Ireland qualified for their first World Cup in 2007, going 19 years. Ireland has only ever played 5 T20Is against England. 2 of them were at the World Cup. They had the rain-out match in somewhere in the West Indies, I believe. That was in 2010 when England and Ireland were on the ropes with each other, and that was when England won their first T20 World Cup title. And then in 2022 in Australia, the match in Melbourne is where Ireland played England as well. And then the first time they had a bilateral T20I series was this past September. They had a 3-match series, and one of those matches was rained out. But it's kind of hard to believe. Even Ireland, who's had test status or full member status since 2017, they've only ever played England 5 times in T20Is in history, and 2 of those came at a World Cup. So the argument is, if you introduce England and the other full members to have them be part of regional qualification, it exposes the associates to those fixtures that have not been arranged on a bilateral basis, and there's always complaints about a cramped schedule and where do you fit these matches in. Well, the regional qualifiers already exist for the associates. The argument is just have the full member teams in each region also be part of it. And I know some people have brought up a counterpoint. Well, oh, geez, imagine the financial catastrophe that would happen if somehow England didn't qualify or India didn't qualify. And I think that's kind of a misnomer of an argument. I mean, realistically, if England were in a qualifying competition on a regional basis against the likes of Scotland, Netherlands, Italy, Jersey, Guernsey, Denmark, Ireland, realistically, would they not qualify? No, it's hard to envision them losing 6 matches or 7 matches. Okay. The point is to get the exposure for the other teams that they don't get in between World Cups currently. And it opens up so many other options from a trickle-down effect. The exposure that they would get from a marketing standpoint, from a sponsorship standpoint. I mean, if you just look at the case of Namibia, for example, in this T20 World Cup, who did they get as a sponsor for their jersey? Flipkart, an Indian company. Why did they get an Indian company on their jersey? Purely because they were playing against India in the same group. And if you go back to 2024, USA's sponsor on their jersey in the T20 World Cup was Amul Dairy. And Amul Dairy is an Indian company. Why did they get an Indian company as a sponsor of the jersey? Because USA was playing India in New York during the T20 World Cup. So whether you're getting corporate sponsorship support from your own domestic brands or some other way that opportunity is being created. The point is, when you get exposed to these higher profile teams, some corporate backing is going to start to develop. And then from a broadcast standpoint, if you look at the regional qualifiers now, all of them are done on a web stream. ICC TV broadcast, which is basically a 3-camera setup. And so you don't even have runouts referred. You don't have DRS. I mean, from a broadcast standpoint, there would be elevated interest that would hopefully generate more higher end broadcast.
Yeah, and obviously the players are going to improve as well, aren't they? I mean, we've seen Nepal, Simon, in this tournament, play above expectations, actually, haven't they? I mean, they really challenged England very well, and they beat Scotland. But they just, you can feel the pressure, can't you, that they're started to generate against, much more senior teams.
Yeah, you need to encourage. You need to have those matches to bring players on, so they're playing regularly. That's the idea. And look, I think we may well get to this eventually. We may have a qualifying tournament eventually when the game is confident enough to do that. When there's that general standard that's higher as a result of teams playing each other a bit more. I mean, it's a bit of a chicken and egg at the moment. You can't improve unless you play the games. But I think eventually we'll get to that. I mean, I'm not necessarily in our lifetimes, yours, possibly not even in Peter's lifetime as well. But we might get to it eventually. Simply because that's the way the game is moving, and that the standard will sort of equalise out. And if England didn't qualify for a T20 World Cup, good, because that will mean the standard is raised. That means England have to get on their game and sort themselves out and become try to become elite again. Same with Australia or even India.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, Australia, of course, are out, much to the mirth of many England fans. It feels like they haven't quite taken this T20 World Cup as seriously. I mean, certainly the accusations are they haven't taken it quite as seriously as perhaps other countries have. And obviously they didn't field their crackerjack fast bowling attack, for instance, partly through injury, in Mitchell Stark's case, because he'd retired from T20s. But in a way, it does open the door to opportunity for other nations. And I'd just like to refer to the current situation as well, the current, the Super 8 situation. So one of the teams that have surprised me slightly, especially after they played against England previous to the tournament, was Sri Lanka, who of course beat Australia, have effectively put them out with that fantastic run chase led by Patan Nissanka, who made a brilliant 100. And actually, it was nice to see, from a kind of technical point of view, it's become a power game, T20, hasn't it, really? But, and sixes is, hitting sixes is not just preferable, it's compulsory, isn't it? But Nissanka is a slender kid, he's not all muscle bound or anything. He's got incredible bat speed. Abhishek Sharma, who hasn't made a run yet in the tournament, but is the number 1 ranked T20 batsman in the world. Again, quite a slender sort of character with fast hands and aspirations. And I wrote a piece on Substack yesterday, actually, the Crick Burst, talking about form. I had an interesting conversation with Zubin Barucha, the coach of Rajasthan Royals and the coach of some young players like Vaibhav Suryavanshi and Yashasvi Jaiswal and people like that, talking about the fact that form has become irrelevant in T20. Because you go out there with the same, if you go out there with the same mindset and you get out second ball, you should be able to go out with the same mindset each time, even though you get second ball naught. And that form is less relevant. I probably explain it better in this article, but Nissanka is certainly a player who's dominated at the top of the order with that, beautiful style he's got. And it reminds me quite a lot of when I was first in Sri Lanka as a kid playing there, and the astonishment I felt at the skill levels of so many players in their club system. Players were running up the wicket and hitting me over the top, an opening bowler from county cricket being deposited back over my head in the first over, and this sort of, beautiful, risk-free sort of feeling that they played with, the sort of feeling of abandonment and sort of fun and expression, which I think has come through in this Sri Lankan team, in the last few games. It's they're England's opponents again on Sunday, and they look a different team, Simon, from the team that England beat 3-0 just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, well, they had a stunning win against Australia, you're right. Although they did drop a game against Zimbabwe yesterday, which actually probably as much credit to Zimbabwe, who've been superb in this competition. I thought it was a brilliant run chase. There's not many teams chase that sort of score at the Pramadasa Stadium. I mean, they were superb. Yeah, Sri Lanka look a bit. The tournaments just bring more out of you. I would think, that the preamble, the defeat against England, the crowds were down a bit. There were people turned up, but it wasn't that same feverish intensity. Certainly not the feverish intensity we saw in Pallekele the other evening when they beat Australia. It was absolutely packed. People dancing and singing, and it was an incredible atmosphere. Look, we have been in the business part of the tournament, but this kind of really ramps up now. Super 8s can't afford to make too many mistakes. You could probably drop one match. But you're going to need to win 2 of your 3, almost certainly, to qualify unless the rain gets involved. So yeah, it all ratchets it up, and it's going to be really fascinating the next week or so with the Super 8 competition. We picked our semi-finalists, didn't we, Yoz? I mean, I went for Afghanistan. They just fell by the wayside. If they'd beaten South Africa in that match, it might have been very different. The ifs and buts of sport. We went for the other 3 teams. I went for South Africa, India, and England. England in a weaker group. I would say weaker. I mean, all these things are relative. England's slightly weaker group. And it's weird that you've got this situation. It's not good for the game, I don't think. Another thing that's not good for the game is the fact that the teams that finish second in the group are all in one section, that all the group winners are in another. England might come through, and New Zealand will be a test for them. Pakistan, we'll see what happens. Sri Lanka, same. I think for England, they might look at the other group and think, glad I'm not in that one.
Yeah, well, definitely, because it's the other group is obviously dominated by India and South Africa. So England have Sri Lanka on Sunday in Pallekele, where they played recently. Then they play Pakistan on Tuesday, also in Pallekele. And then they play New Zealand on Friday in Premadasa in Colombo. So 3 matches in Sri Lanka, which sort of helps England slightly because they obviously played those matches in Sri Lanka before the tournament. So they're sort of familiar with the pitches there. And who has the highest average in the tournament currently? A surprising name, Brian Bennett, the opening bat for Zimbabwe, who hasn't yet been dismissed. He's had 3 not outs in run chases. And so
you can't focus on averages in T20 cricket.
But the point is, he hasn't yet been dismissed, interestingly, and has been one of Zimbabwe's success stories. No, you're right. Averages are irrelevant, and I argue in this article at the Crickverse on Substack that form is irrelevant too, because the mentality of a good T20 player should be that they just go into bat each time, completely wiping the slate clean of what happened before. And it's interesting, Abhishek Sharma, as I mentioned, he's had 3 ducks. He hasn't made a run in the tournament yet. And there have been lots of inevitable Indian speculation about, what's wrong with him. And the key for him is to believe there's nothing wrong with him at all. Go in with the same fearless mindset that he's had through the last year or 2, and he'll probably add to those 88 sixes he's already hit in the 37 T20 matches that he's played. It is about a mindset, isn't it? Even more than Test cricket, which is a sort of examination of your soul and your technique and your resilience and so on. T20 is really just an examination of your self-belief, actually. Going out there and playing a free way, and if it doesn't come off one time, don't worry, because it'll come off next time.
Well, good luck, Abhishek Sharma. I think if you have 3 ducks, I think it starts to play on your mind.
Only if you read the press.
Yeah, well, no, I think
the Indian press.
You go back to your hotel room after 3 ducks, and then you come out next time. I think you start to doubt yourself a little bit, inevitably. But let's see how he gets on the next time he's out there. If indeed he makes the next game, I mean, they could make a change. Peter, you've obviously watched a lot of the tournament. We gave our possible semi-finalists at the start of the tournament, and one of them has fallen by the wayside only just. I mean, that was such a difficult group that Afghanistan were in against New Zealand and South Africa, and they weren't that far away from coming through it. And that was, it was the game of the tournament. It was just sensational drama for 4 hours and 20 minutes that game existed for. Where are you looking for your semi-finalists? Who do you think who's most likely for you to make the semi-finals?
India is a shoe-in in my book. I mean, the hosts, I just feel like they've got an overwhelming advantage as hosts. And I would say West Indies, if I had to pick a team, I just feel like there's something about this West Indies squad, the way they've shaped up and gone through this tournament, the way they beat England, the way they've beaten the other teams. They've just been very clinical in a kind of a surprising way. They don't have the big names, perhaps, compared to their previous World Cup winning squads, whether it's Gale or Pollard or Russell or even Puran, who maybe Puran is wishing maybe I shouldn't have retired so early. Maybe this is tempting me to want to come back for the West Indies going forward. They've been mighty impressive to me, but I wouldn't count Zimbabwe out. Zimbabwe, the way they've performed, and I want to go back to the regional qualification point because they missed the 2024 T20 World Cup. They missed it because they were in the regional qualifier and they lost to both Namibia and Uganda. Uganda came out of Africa in 2024. And I think part of the reason why they fell short in those games because they didn't pay the respect to their opponents. I think they kind of looked at it and said, oh, we'll just walk through qualifying easy. This is going to be nothing special. And they got embarrassed by Uganda and Namibia. It wasn't just one loss that was an upset. They lost 2 matches there. And I think that really chastened them and was a wake-up call that they needed because the way they approached having to go through qualifying for 2026, going through regional qualification again, and then coming into this tournament, the way they performed, I think that was a wake-up call that they needed. And to me, it's more proof of getting there on merit. Okay? You look at the FIFA example, I don't think you should have a historical birthright with full member status to automatically have a spot in these events. Zimbabwe has earned their place to come into this tournament and get to the Super 8s. And you look at Italy, for example, as recently as 2006, winning the FIFA World Cup. That doesn't mean they have an automatic spot in the FIFA World Cup for perpetuity. They didn't qualify the last several editions, and they're still going to be in a playoff to have to fight their way to get to USA in 2026. And in a similar way, you look at West Indies in the 50 over World Cup in 2023, they didn't qualify. Netherlands came out of the qualifier along with Sri Lanka, and they took the 2 qualification spots that were there in the 50 over World Cup qualifier. West Indies, just because they won the World Cup in 1975 and 1979, doesn't mean they should have an automatic birthright to the 50 over World Cup, be there in perpetuity. They need to be there on merit. So what's impressed me the most is how Zimbabwe has bounced back from a very demoralizing series of results in the regional qualification in 2023, 2024, not even getting a chance to go to the USA. And they've used that as a springboard to get their act together and put in some really impressive performances against, I would say, the most impressive, arguably, in a dead rubber against Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, on home soil, chasing that target the way they did, I wouldn't count them out. If you asked me, I would put my money on India and West Indies, even ahead of South Africa.
Interesting.
And then in the other half of the draw, I would say New Zealand has been very impressive. And I would say Sri Lanka, I put a lot of stock in that home field advantage. I feel like Sri Lanka and New Zealand are better placed than perhaps England. The way England struggled against both Nepal and Italy, I feel like they're a bit vulnerable. And I would put my money on New Zealand and Sri Lanka in that half of the Super 8 draw.
Interesting. Yeah,
I think we both think that England are a bit vulnerable as well, Yours, don't we? They're bowling.
I think they'll make it through. I don't think New Zealand haven't convinced me. We'll see on Saturday when New Zealand play Pakistan, actually, in the first game of the Super 8s. But they haven't sort of entirely clicked New Zealand, I don't think, and neither have England, of course. I just think England and Sri Lanka will make it through. I just think New Zealand might just get eased out in that group, and the other side, I mean, I can't see past India and South Africa. Actually, I hear you about West Indies, Peter, but I just feel it's such a shame. There's no Nicholas Puran, no Sunil Narine either. I wish he was playing in the T20 World Cup. I mean, he's such a brilliant cricketer, but for whatever reason, he's not involved either. So I just think West Indies are sort of missing something there, which could help. But they're so powerful. I mean, they are dangerous for sure. So it's interesting, all to play for. So listen, I think we probably should just say goodbye now because we've been talking for quite a while here about the various issues. But the T20 World Cup has actually thrown up lots of great matches, as you said, Simon, and new heroes as well. and lots of opportunity for the game. In a way, it's echoing what the ICC have tried to do, which is spread the game around the globe and made it a proper global competition, which this one feels.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think 3 matches a day has definitely worked. I think the games have okay. There hasn't been an associate team upsetting a full member, but the games have been much closer. I was watching that England-Italy game the other day, and I was thinking, if Menenti had batted for another 2 overs or 3 overs, whatever, I know it's ifs and buts, England would have lost that game, despite scoring a really big total. That's why I worry about England's bowling. I have done for a while. So the games have been better, and okay. We've got a relatively predictable last 8. Zimbabwe, I didn't see making the last 8. I thought Australia would qualify, but it's absolutely compelling. Look, India look the favourites, but I think even they got a little bit of vulnerability. Have they got that experience in the batting lineup? They've got the style, the class, but have they got that experience? They've nearly been found out a couple of times, and they've come through, albeit they hammered Pakistan. That was impressive. So maybe they really step up when it matters. But it all ramps up now, and I think it's been a brilliant tournament. I suppose it's about the game in the future. And we'll talk with Peter about that, but having the confidence really that, I was saying, it'd be great if England had to qualify. It'd be great if India had to qualify, whatever in the future. And if these teams did drop out, well, so be it. That's what the game needs. It needs that kind of expansion, needs that raising of quality all round, and hopefully it will look a bit different, say in 20 or 30 years time when we come round to a T20 World Cup. It seems more vibrant, the T20 World Cup, than the 50 over World Cup. I think that's
more condensed, isn't it? Which is a good thing. So the 2 big games on Sunday, actually, of course, England, Sri Lanka, as I said, and also India playing South Africa. So that'll be a bumper Sunday, and we'll be back after those 2 games to report on them and see how Abhishek Sharma responds when he gets his first run of the tournament.
If he does.
If
I was commentating on his game the other day, and I was surely he's going to get a run here, and then he was cleaned up. He had his leg pole knocked out. Right. There we go. So just finally, Peter, very, very quick, your finalists then. You've gone West Indies, India, and you've got Sri Lanka again and New Zealand. Who are your finalists? Just put you on the spot.
I'll say India and New Zealand.
India, New Zealand. Well, it could be. Yeah. It's been a good competition, and there's a lot to look forward to. I think that's fair. So, look, thanks very much, Peter. Great to have you with us, sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
Many of them on, all the associates and also the potential qualification in the future. We'll be back, won't we, after a thrilling weekend. Hopefully it's a thrilling weekend anyway, the first weekend of the Super 8s. So that's it. Thanks very much for your company. Goodbye for now.